we always have people that stand out as the best among the best. Exceptional. Sports is something that's big for so many in this room. So many of you are passionate about your favorite teams, your favorite players. Others of you could care less. But even so, if I gave you these three initials, I suspect everybody in this room knows what that stands for. MVP. What's that? Oh, yeah, most valuable player. You know what it is when somebody makes it into the Hall of Fame? You're talking about the best of the best, exceptional in comparison to others who are good, better than us, and yet here's the cream of the crop. You know, that's the way it is in sports. Is somebody always excels above the others. And so it is with that in mind, I'm taking you back to ancient times. Not so much looking at sports. Now we're looking at military heroes. And this morning's message is entitled David and His Mighty Men. David and His Mighty Men, our text is 2 Samuel chapter 23. Now, when I give you that title, I'm actually taking it straight from the text. Because as it introduces this section of Scripture, it begins this way. The writer says, now here's the list of the names of the mighty men of David. What were these mighty men? They were the heroes. They were the champions among David's soldiers. You see, back in those days, they'd have their soldiers, all of them good men, ready to fight. But some would excel. Some would be the best of the best. And in David's army, they were called the mighty men. That was their title. Now, what we find out in 2 Samuel chapter 23, there's about 30 of them. Actually, a little bit more than 30, but they're called the 30. That's just a rounded number to represent these fellas. Now, these guys, every one, had great stories to tell. Because the reason they made it into the list is because they did something that was amazing. It was exceptional. It's the kind of thing from which legends come. Stories are told and songs are sung. Well, basically what they did was what David himself had done when that shepherd boy stood in front of the giant Goliath. No soldier would take him on one-on-one, so David said, I'll do it. David got out there with a sling and stones and took down the giant, inspired the soldiers of Israel to a great victory, and they told that story. They sung songs about David. And you see, David inspired the idea of the mighty men. Men who did something so courageous and so amazing that people told it over and over and over again, and they sung their praises. Now, when they did, and they told the stories were real. Sometimes the telling of the story can get hyped up with a lot of praise, but the stories are real stories of exceptional men in the army of David, the heroes, the champions. And so it is, there's tales to be told here. Oh, some glorious tales. And what he does is he tells you some of their stories. Now, he gives it to you in short form. You're only going to get a sentence. And you don't get the rest of the stories. You just get some things, but it's enough to give you a taste of what David's mighty men were like and their tales of valor. Now, there's 5 in particular where he tells you something about each one of those 5. They represent all the rest, but these 5 are standouts. In fact, they're probably the top of the heap of what already is an exceptional group of fighting men. Let me tell you about those 5. First, the first 3 that are in the list, these 3 belong together. They had a nickname. They were called the 3. No filling in, just the 3. They stood out from all the others, kind of kept to themselves. If all the others had to stand at attention when David came in the room, they're probably the 3 walking in with David. They were standouts. Kind of like, many of you know the story, the 3 Musketeers. They were part of a larger group of royal guards, but these 3 stood out from the rest of them. Well, David had his 3. Now, the first of the 3, a guy named Joshua. Now, Joshua made it to the top of the heap because of at least one story. There's probably more, but the story that 2 Samuel tells us this, that on one occasion, he faced the Philistine army and he took down 800 men. Now, that's huge. That is standing there for hours. As the army thinks they've got this man, we'll take him down, and he's thinking, you'll die trying. And he just stood there with his sword, and he went after them until finally the last one fell, and perhaps others retreated. 800 men at a time. Now, if that sounds incredible, keep in mind, that's not the first time that ever happened. We go back to the book of Judges. We have the story of Samson. Everybody knows Samson, the muscle man, who took the jawbone of a donkey. And we're told when the Philistines surrounded him trying to arrest him, he started hitting and slaying. Next thing you know, he took down 1,000. There's another fellow in the book of Judges named Shamgar. And it says the Spirit came upon him. He took an ox goad. It'd be the stick that's used to move oxen along. He took that thing as his weapon. He began to swing that. Next thing you know, he took down 600. And so in the spirit of those two great heroes from the book of Judges, we get Joshua. And Joshua stood there, and before the day was done, he took down 800 of the enemy. He makes it up into the top of the three that are above all the rest. Now, next to him, Eleazar. Now, Eleazar distinguished himself for the same kind of thing. He, too, stood on a battlefield against great numbers, and he decided, I'm going to take them down or die trying. And so he gripped that sword as hard as he could, and he fought back. And when he finished, they're down, and he's still standing. And it says the Lord gave him a great victory that day. It also adds one little historical detail, and he had gripped that sword handle so tightly that when he finished, his hand was frozen to the grip, and he's going to have to relax that thing to get his fingers to let go. Boy, that was an intense day. He's number 2 of the three. Alongside them is Shammah. And Shammah, it says, stood alone. Now, I like that. He stood alone in a field of lentils. See, on the occasion when he fought, there were other soldiers there, but when they saw what was coming, they backed off. This guy said, I'm not backing off, and he stood there and fought them in a field of lentils. Now, the fact that it mentions the field, picture a field of beans today, black-eyed peas or whatever, just picture a field, and he's standing in the middle of the field. What that suggests is, I know the occasion, because we know what the Philistines did. What the Philistines often did is they stayed on their side of the border was every year around the time of harvest, when Israel has worked for months with all of their crops, and now they're bringing them in and they're ready to put them in the barns, that's when the Philistines would come in with their army raiding parties. They come in, they loot, they plunder, they pillage, they kill, they take your stuff and they take it home. You did all the work, and then they come steal it. They'll come back next year, same time. It suggests he's standing there and he's saying, this time, not this time, fellas. You're not taking it this time, as he stands in that field of lentils. Reminds me of something that's become a classic movie thing. Some of you have seen these kind of movies. Remember the movie, The Magnificent Seven? Those 7 guys who are gunslingers, and they're going to defend a town that has asked for their help. Because every year these outlaws come in and they steal, they leave misery in their wake, and somebody needs to stand up to them. We can't, and so the 7 magnificent stand there. Based on a story in Japanese, the 7 samurai, but actually that's based on the ancient times. When a village says, somebody please help us. Every year they do this to us, and this guy, he said, I'm doing it. I'm standing against him, and God gave him a great victory, and he took him down, standing there alone. Now those 3 make up the excellent above the excellent. They're in a category unto themselves. Now the next guy, he's pretty good, Abishai. And Abishai was appointed by David to be in charge of the mighty men. And not the 3, they stand alone, but all the 30 of the mighty men, this is the guy that led them. So what did he do that was so spectacular? Well, Abishai took a spear. Sword is what's preferred, slicing and dicing, but he's got a spear which he'll also swing and hit with. He took down 300 men one day as he stood there alone facing the enemy. Now you may say, boy, that doesn't sound as much as those other guys. That's not shabby. If you could stand in battle, take down 300 who came after you, that's a hero. He's the leader then of the 30 of the mighty men. Now the last guy, Benaiah. You might be thinking, okay, we start at the top, we work our way down, but I look at Benaiah and I'm thinking, no, maybe we save the best for last. Because David took Benaiah and brought him close to him. Benaiah will be the captain of the palace guards. He's the equivalent of being the head of Secret Service. The soldiers who stand around David all the time to keep him safe, this is the guy who's in charge of them, and he'll be David's right-hand man. I think David took him because, he was the top of the top. Actually, he's the closest of all of them to being, like David himself. 3 little stories are told to us about what Benaiah did that are outstanding. Here's the first one. It says that he killed 2 champions from Moab. Now, it's a little tricky here reading the Hebrew text because it says that he slew 2 ariels. And that's why some translations will just simply say that, and it makes no sense to me and you. He slew 2 ariels. What's that? Some will say, he slew 2 sons of a guy named Ariel. And while that may make sense, it's not really what it means. See, Ariel is the word for lion of God. It was a term that was used for warriors. Great warriors were called lions of God. That's what Moab called their mighty men. David's are called the mighty men. Moab calls theirs the lions of God. But it's the same thing. Who's the best of the best among your fighting men? Now what Benaiah did was he took on 2 of the best of Moab and took them both down. Now, what we don't know is, did he face them both at the same time? Now, that would be a competition. 2 of the best against one of the best, 1 against 2, but he took them down. Maybe he fought them at separate times. Either way, he bested the best of Moab, and that makes him somebody special. Not only that, it says that he went down into a pit on a snowy day and killed a lion. Now, first, if you're thinking, I didn't realize they had lions and tigers and bears. They don't have tigers. That's east. That's India. They do have lions and they do have bears. And if you come back tonight for my study, I'll tell you a bear story when I tell you about Elisha. But right now we're on lions. They did have lions. They lived up in the hills. But sometimes in winter, and this is snow, sometimes in winter they come down into the valleys foraging for food, getting a little too close on this occasion, getting into the village. Now, a lion loose in a village looking for food, that's a dangerous thing. Reminds me of where we live. We live in Smallwood. We have what we call the Smallwood bear. We apparently have a bear. Some of the owners of houses will catch them on the camera. And every so often comes in and forages through the garbage cans and gets the bird feeder. And I always think, oh, that's cute. Not if you come out your door at night and run into the thing and somebody gets injured, the cute disappears, and you realize that's a hazard. To have a bear in a neighborhood, it's something that needs to be dealt with, perhaps. A lion roaming in a village is a hazard to the people. And so here's a hero that says, I'll take care of that lion. It says the lion was in a pit. It'd be a low area, perhaps used to catch water, perhaps used for tromping on grapes or whatever. It's in the pit, but it's in a closed space. When the lion went in a closed space, he says, that's a good place. I got him cornered, because you're cornered with him. Snowy day, the text says, which means footing is not going to be at your best. This is going to be a challenging competition, but it doesn't matter. Benaiah took him down. He makes the list of heroes because of what he's able to do. Got one more story that we're told about him, that one day he encountered an Egyptian. The way he's described in the text was he was an Egyptian of great stature. There is in the Hebrew a measurement, six furlongs. We don't exactly know what it means. That is, we don't know what the equivalent is to ours, and so I can't just tell you how tall he is, but I will tell you he's just a little shy of the description of Goliath, the giant. In other words, it's another giant, an Egyptian giant. Guy had a spear, and the spear is described as exceptionally big and exceptionally long. Benaiah showed up with a club. That's like showing up with a knife at a gunfight. You got the wrong tool for what you're going to be facing. Because with that spear, you can't even get close to the guy with your little club. He wasn't fazed by that. He took him on anyway. And it says that he took the spear away from the giant and then used the spear to kill the giant. Now, I can imagine that story because these ancient heroes who stood on the battlefield, they often taunted the other guy. They called him out, called him names. It's kind of like what Goliath did. When every day he stood out there, he taunted the army of Israel. And then when David came, he said, oh, you little scrawny thing, I'm going to feed you to the birds. Now, oftentimes when a taunt is put out there, you turn it around. Feed you to the birds, and David says, when this thing is over, we'll see which one of us is lying on the ground and which one the birds are eating. I can well imagine when that guy had his spear against a club, he told him what he was going to do with that spear, and I expect Benaiah told him what I'm going to do with your spear. And sure enough, he took it from him, and he ran that spear through him. I think he's probably the best of the best because he's the one David pulled in close. David pulled him in to be his guard. But, he's a lot like David. I mean, what did David do? David stood up against a giant with just a sling, but took him down. David took on a lion and a bear as a shepherd boy. He wasn't afraid of such things. And David was a man who could stand up against anybody else's champion. And I'll take you on, because he believed in the power of the Lord working through him. Now, that's 5 of your mighty men. 5 stories told in 2 Samuel chapter 23. Listen, that's the last of the stories, because then we just get names. We have what I call the untold stories. There's a story there. Every one of these guys has a story that's going to be an amazing story. It's just that the writer doesn't take the time to tell all the stories. He just tells a few to represent the rest. It's a good reminder, though, how it works, isn't it? That for every story that's told, there's also going to be a lot of other untold stories. For every name that is named, there's a whole lot of other unnamed names. It's that way in the Bible. Actually, it's that way in life. That's how it works in the church, for example. In the church, sometimes there'll be someone here who gets attention. Someone whose name is called out because of something that they did. But for every name that's named, there's a lot of other names that don't get named. And for every story that's told, there's still other stories that aren't told. It's the way it is. It's the way it has to be, because we can't just tell everything. And that's why when we're trying to say thanks to you for something, it's always hard. You hate leaving people out. Oftentimes we do a generic, thanks to all of you who volunteered, thanks for all of you who showed up, thanks for all of you who did. And we do that, but sometimes there's somebody, you just got to call them out. They did something that was exceptional. I mean, it needed to be mentioned, and so we'll mention a name. But for every name we name, there's other names that didn't get named that are worthy of being named. For every story we tell, there's stories that are also worth telling. We just didn't. That's how life is. But let me tell you this, though. There's something good here. Because Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 6, he says, listen, if on earth men praise you, well, then you've had your praise. But if men don't praise you on earth, be rest assured that your heavenly Father will praise you when you arrive in your heavenly home. Tell you the truth, I'd just assume people didn't say much about me down here, wouldn't you? Because when you arrive there, you're getting a better praise, the one from your heavenly Father. And that's why we will sometimes name some names and tell some stories, just like the Bible does. Doesn't mean the rest of the names, the rest of the stories aren't worth much. Oh, they are. They're worth a lot. And one day in heaven, everyone receives the praise and the reward they deserve. Well, that's David's mighty men. They're a great group. Now, let me talk about their loyalty and their valor. You recognize those 2 words. Those are words often used for military men. Loyalty, loyal and devoted to their leader. And valor. Valor refers to courage and bravery under fire. When others duck, they stand their ground and they fight back. That describes great soldiers. That describes the mighty men. Now, this is where the writer, 2 Samuel chapter 23, decides to tell one story, and he doesn't even tell us which mighty men he's talking about. He just says, and there were 3 of them. We don't know which 3. Could have been the 3, of course. Could have been any mix and match of all of them. But it says there were 3 of one time that went on a daring mission. It illustrates the loyalty and the valor of David's mighty men. Now here's the story. Philistines, once again, they're in like always. And as they're in, they're camped in public out in the valleys. They've got their tents set up for everybody to see. On this occasion, David and his men are hiding up in the hills. These guys get the standing bold, and they're in the hiding. David's hiding in a cave of Adullam. They're trying to figure out, what are we going to do? How are we going to push them out of our country? Now, while they're talking, and David is surrounded by his mighty men, David makes an offhand statement. Because he has heard that they have occupied Bethlehem. They've taken it over as a command post. Well, that's his hometown. That's where his family lives. And David says, oh, how I wish that someone would give me a cup of water from the well of Bethlehem just outside the gate. Now, if you go there and visit today, they'll take you to the well of David, the well of Bethlehem. It's less than a mile, about a half mile, 3/4 mile on the north side of the town. David says, oh, I wish I had a cup of water from there. There's a little bit of nostalgia for his hometown. A little bit of sadness and grief that the enemy are occupying his hometown, and he wasn't able to defend his people, his family. Whatever all he's feeling, he says, I wish I had a cup of cold water from there. Now, folks, you need to remember this. Always be careful what you wish for. Somebody might give it to you. There are times you and I will make statements that are exaggerated, we didn't mean for them to be taken literally. Somebody does if they're really devoted to us. You know what we'll say sometimes? Somebody puts out this fancy piece of dessert, and what some people say, oh, I'd die for that. I hope you don't mean that. No dessert's worth that, right? Or the opposite, I'd kill for it, and I'd have to preach a sermon about you if you did that. Listen, we sometimes say things like that. I tell you, I've had to learn through the years the hard way. Be careful what you praise. You may end up with it. And, trying to buy a gift. I'm watching my wife every time we shop. If I see her look at something long enough, I'm thinking, that's what she wants. I buy it. She's got a collection of things. She didn't really want them. She's just looking. You got to be careful. I got a few things as well that they just hang up there. I'm not wearing that. But somebody thought, well, it looked like you liked them. I'm cautious too, because if somebody says, what do you think? Oh, I love it. Be careful. You may get a box of it and think, well, I didn't love it that much, right? You see, David says, I wish I had a cup of cold water from the well of Bethlehem. Next thing you know, 3 guys say, let's do it. And they take a town that's occupied by the Philistines. They break through. They load up a canteen of water. They break their way back out, and they bring the water to David. Well, that just shows you the kind of loyalty, the kind of bravery of the mighty men. Any one of them would have done it. David took that water, and he poured it on the ground. Now, commentators and preachers will do their best to dress that up and make it sound like a noble act. And it probably is. I'm in the minority. I'm thinking, what a stupid thing. I'm thinking I would have taken a sip from it. Because after all, I'm just imagining how disappointed I'd be if I fought for the water and then you poured it out. And I think like that, I'd have probably taken a sip from it. But I know what David was doing. I got to give him credit. What he did was he gave an offering to God. It's what's called a libation. Now, you know, back in those days, they took animals and sacrificed them as an offering to God. You may know they took grain, and they would bring that to the priest as a sacrifice to God. It would be eaten by the priest and their family. Maybe you didn't know this. They also had what they called the libation offering. It'd be something expensive, an expensive wine, or an expensive oil, a perfume. And as they presented that as their sacrifice, it would be poured on the ground, because you're taking something very costly, and instead of using it for human purposes, you're giving it to the Lord. You're pouring it out before God. You know, almost on the same spot where David was some time ago, back in Genesis chapter 35, Jacob was there, and Jacob offered a libation offering to the Lord. He poured his expensive oil on the ground. David's repeating what Jacob did. So I got to give him credit. He's doing a nice thing. I still think I would have taken a sip and then poured, but whatever. David offers something costly. It costs these men put their lives at risk, and he offers it before God. I got to think if the men understood what that was, they would have been pleased. They would have been pleased that their heroic act was presented to God as a great thing. But what this illustrates is this. David's mighty men were quite some men. These guys were filled with strength and courage and bravery. They were loyal to a fault. If David just expresses a desire, they're after it. You know, that kind of devotion, boy, that's great. That kind of devotion is what I call a great inspiration. You see, first, those men were inspired by David himself. You see, they wanted to be like David. That shepherd boy who stood alone when no one else would stand there and took down a giant. I want to be like David. And they did. They became like David. They became mighty men like the mighty David. He inspired them. And folks, that's the way it should be. Great leaders should inspire people to follow in their path and become like them. Now, at the same time, they became an inspiration to the rest of the soldiers. By singling them out as exceptional, you also send a message to the rest to pick up their game, to aspire to be like them. They can do it, so can you. And so it is, they became an inspiration to those who followed behind them. I like that idea because that's a good biblical truth. You know, when Paul is writing to Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 2, he tells him, I want you to find people in your church that you can raise up to be teachers, teaching the Word of God in the church. Now, when you raise them to be teachers, tell them in turn to find others who can teach, as they teach others how to teach what they teach, and we pass along. Yeah, great leaders inspire someone to rise up, and they in turn inspire others to rise as well. Paul told Titus, you got older ladies in the church, tell those older ladies if they've had a good marriage, good home, to teach the younger women how to be good wives and good mothers, teach them what they know, and then they in turn can pass it on to the next generation. That's the way it ought to be, is people doing the best they can, inspiring others and teaching others how to do that as well. Well, that's how it works with David's mighty men. But I got to bring that to the present, to me and you, because I'm believing that we still can be inspired by those mighty men today. Here's what I think. I think this very day we need some mighty men. Now, ladies, if you'll permit me for a moment, I want to speak just to the men of the assembly here, because among the men here, we need to rise up and be mighty men for today. We need mighty men in our families, leading our families. And by that I have in mind taking a strong hand in developing the faith of the children and grandchildren that are under our care. Now, ladies, I know this so well. Mothers have a way of nurturing that sometimes goes beyond what we men can do. That you're just so natural at it. You get the time to invest in that we sometimes don't get. A lot of the nurturing, the spiritual nurturing especially, happens with the ladies. It happens with the mothers. But men, make sure that as the father, that you're also a visible support, whatever is being done by someone else. That is, you're not just sending them off to Sunday school and church. You're there with them. You're leading. And not just watching someone else teach the stories, whatever, but you're there with them. Make sure that you show that you're a man of faith, and you want your children to grow up in the faith as well. I think that's important for our kids and our grandkids. I think it's especially important, fathers, for us to do this with our sons and show them a model of what they need to grow up and become as well. Listen, we need some mighty men leading our families. We need mighty men working in our communities, and I think we have it. Because all of you are out there doing whatever you do, but I want you to do more than just work a job. Work a job in a godly manner, showing honesty and integrity in all that you do, that people, they associate that with you. Showing hard work and busyness, as well as the helping hand for those who need it, and all those good qualities that people recognize, they love it, and that ought to be you. It's part of your witness as you're out there in the community. And with that witness comes those occasions when you know it's just right to ask a person about their faith and whether or not they've got a church and would they like to come join you at yours. And we need mighty men in our community. We also need mighty men in our church, serving here in the church. And we're always asking for volunteers, like this coming Saturday, like the Man of Ministry, like the other times when we'll ask for volunteers. And many of you will, but some of you haven't yet figured out what it is you want to do here. You come, and I appreciate that, but you haven't found a place of service. We all ought to be aspiring to that. Come next time, to whatever. Come talk to someone and say, what is it you think I could do? We'll find a place of service, but we need some mighty men serving, volunteering. We need teachers. We're always needing teachers. I'm thinking of the youth program, the children's program. I'm thinking of a lot of places. I'm thinking of VBS. We need teachers. We need assistants to teachers. We need some mighty men to step up, along with the ladies who help. We need some men to step up and say, I'll take a turn as a deacon. Our deacons get together as a team. They work on a lot of different things that have to do with the operation of this church. All the things that keep this building operating, keep some of our programming going, working our budget each year and the finances. It's a team effort, and we could use some good minds and some good hands to come join in that team, take a turn, and help those deacons do the job they do. We need some mighty men to step up and take a turn as elder. That's a challenging job because the elders have to deal with the faith issues of the church, deal with some of the pastoral issues and such as that. But it's a team that works together and shoulders the load together, and a few more shoulders in there would certainly be a great thing. If some of you would say, I ought to do that someday, come talk to me about that, because, folks, we need some mighty men in this church, in our community, in our families. That's what we need. And I think that's really the takeaway from this story of David and his mighty men, that there's always a call that's out there. It's kind of like the slogan you've heard in our modern times, we're looking for a few good men. And I think the Lord is always looking for a few good men. Few men to rise up, to meet their potential in the Lord, to use their potential in ways that make a difference in others, to lead, to inspire, and to serve. And fellas, I want you to think about that, because that's what we need. We need some mighty men.